Good morning. Thanks. So I'm going to just lay down a couple ground rules so that you know what I'm doing up here, because my role is to be an educator today to some degree. The purpose of the design thinking workshop, for those of you who don't have a design background, is to help you learn the process that we go through to develop the process that results in a design. As such, I'm going to be brief. As much as I want to respond to everything Tom talked about last night, I don't get that pleasure this time. So to start things off, this is one of the best quotes that I've run across in my 5 years of intensive design study at the College of Design that describes kind of the experiential quality of being a designer. And it's in your pamphlet, so I would recommend just reading that so you kind of know why designers at least claim to be thinking differently than other people. So design thinking, it's a term that a lot of designers shy away from because it's self-evident to many of us that design thinking is a term that was developed in order to create a public profile for certain designers. It was a term that was developed in the kind of corporate product development design fields. Specifically IDEO, of which I'm sure people have seen IDEO's work, whether they've pushed a shopping cart around they've developed or dealt with an iPhone case cover that they were responsible for. So there's been a lot of hype, and Tom touched on that last night, just the idea that design thinking has kind of gotten into the media sphere. It's something that's talked about. There are conferences happening everywhere. Everybody seems to have a book out on design thinking nowadays, and they're suggesting that design thinking can be applied to everything from raising your children in a new way, it's claimed. I'm going to make a claim later on that it's an old way that we're rediscovering. And I'm sure most of you will discover going through the process today and then thinking about design thinking as you reprocess the experience of this conference over the next few years. That you do it already. You're already design thinkers. It's gotten to the point where colleges, universities around the globe are developing design thinking degrees. So people specialize in thinking, which is excellent that practical application degrees are starting to be about philosophy, I think. So how I've framed this is we're going to run through some kind of breakdown questions. We're going to break down design thinking, and we're going to break down how designers get to creating a plan, which is the ultimate result of a design process. Design process does not result in a product. That's up to management and industry and so on and so forth. My background is in construction. I was a general contractor for a number of years, and then I came to study architecture, finish up an undergraduate degree that had eluded me for years. And in that process, I discovered landscape architecture. And it was a really, really good fit because it allowed me to be an even greater generalist than an architect permitted me to be. And the scale of thinking in landscape architecture is quite vast. Not that it isn't in other design disciplines, but that's my interest in that. And as you'll notice, this is not a linear presentation yet. It will become linear. And you probably noticed in Tom's presentation last night that there is this kind of a jumping around. There's kind of a kinetic movement in how a designer talks about stuff. So I'm presenting you kind of the foundation of the issues that we need to know to be doing design thinking. Designers need to think in two different ways, and the principal way to make yourself think in two different ways is to make things. And anytime you write with your hands, not typing on a keyboard, but with a pen or pencil, anytime you doodle a sketch, you're activating an aspect of your brain that isn't always functional. It's not always a primary aspect because you're presented with problems every day and you have to solve those problems through a reducing logical method. So I'm going to prompt everybody. There were some people in the front rows last night that were taking lots of notes, but throughout the day, particularly when you're listening to the presentations this morning, you need to be taking not just notes, but put your own ideas down. because the design process is not about regurgitating the information that the person with the problem or the institution with the problem presents you. It's about what you are interpreting and hearing in their presentation. So the presentations that you'll hear on the panel this morning are geared towards problem statements, explaining the scope of issues that they're running into in food systems, in extension revisioning itself, and in how we are going to use our larger landscape for nature-based recreation. Also, do not silo yourselves. Don't just focus on the workshop that you are going to be participating in. You should be looking at the other systems, because the answers, as the design process often reveals, lie outside of the silo, which you're focused on solving the need in. So what is design? I've kind of already touched on that. This is as distilled and as ambiguous a definition as I was able to come up with. And quite simply, it's that design is a process through which methods are employed and the cause of resolving a human need. And it's important to understand that methods are tools, and that's it. It's not any higher than that. So if you're a really good typist, that's a tool that needs to be applied in the process. If you're a really good drawer, that's a tool that you can apply in the process. If you are amazing at figuring out how to connect mind maps and make the relationships clear to other people, that's a tool to apply in the process. And we need to understand that all design is in the efforts of solving a human need. Oftentimes, design is being applied currently to solve the fiduciary concerns of corporations or private interests, and that is definitely a way that it can be applied. But I think that the broader scale of the issues that we're going to be looking at this morning and trying to start to figure out how one resolves this afternoon kind of go beyond the boundaries of these systems that have been designed that we seem to be adherent to, money systems, social orders, and such like that. What is thinking? I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a neurologist. But because I came into design school at a time when design thinking was the latest and greatest thing to keep civilization moving forward, this is something that I've done a lot of thinking about, is what are the processes that we're going through when we're thinking, we're problem solving and living lives. And I've come to an understanding that there are two distinct ways in which we think. And both of those ways, they have different internal nuances that each of you knows and could probably articulate if you were pressed to. But they're all, it's analysis. All your brain has evolved to do is analyze the conditions that present themselves and permit you to respond. So both modes of thinking are about analysis. And we do two different things. We reduce things down to singular points, and then we can act on them. And that is the primary paradigm in which we live in, where we're told in everything we do, when you go to the bank and you go to the ATM machine, you're presented with a series of vertical questions. It's a yes or no. Even if you're given a myriad of opportunities to select $20 or $60 or enter your own amount, they're all yes or no endings. And that's what we term as vertical thinking. It's what allows science to do what it does. It's how we get the products we get. It's how we can find in nature the moments to manage and manipulate and create things like the iPhone we talked about last night. But it's narrow. And we're discovering as a species and as a society that it is narrow, and we've narrowed ourselves. The process of enlightenment was about narrowing and becoming really, really good at mastering the physical world. But that had problems to it, as we're all discovering. Horizontal thinking is often described in classical philosophy as holding on to simultaneous things within vertical columns. But that's not exactly a clear statement of how your brain is working and how a design process seeks to have your brain actively working more at doing, which is holding things across different time periods. So there's a temporal dimension to this. You don't have to deal with each silo of each need sequentially at the same time. You could be dealing with new needs, and as you try to solve one need, a city needs a park, you might realize that really it doesn't matter if they have a park if they don't have a trail system. Well, now you're dealing with a secondary need. And those things might be happening at different time periods, and that's where you get into phasing when you're developing plans. But then you can also add a dimension. So it's not just about the trail system in your town or the small park in your town. It might be about the fact that your town is really going to be more vibrant if it has pedestrian and bike access to adjacent towns. And so you're moving across in dimensions, and when you start to do that, and we're focused on nature-based rec and how an institution can engage with communities and how food systems operate, it gets huge. I mean, when you talk about food systems nowadays, it's a global enterprise. And that gets very messy. So design is messy, and the way that we get to successful design is to go back and forth between these two moments, where we think about everything in totality, and then we pigeonhole it so that we can deal with the different parts, and then we bring it all back together, and that's when you've created a plan. So what can it do? I've kind of hit on some of the things that it can do. And I think that this list is really important because it, in my opinion, is as holistic as I can be in a field where design is about to be applied to everything human beings do, not just to the products that we consume or the spaces that we occupy, but we're going to start applying it to our institutional organizations. It will possibly bleed out into the political sphere. And so it's really important to understand that the design process is messy. It's going to reveal other needs. It's then going to permit you to organize them. And ultimately, it's meant to get you to a plan. That's where we really want to get, is to get to an ordered sense of being able to react. We'll look at this a little more closely later, but everybody wants to know how you do it. They want the blueprint. You want the list of instructions so that you can go out and follow it. And I'm afraid I can't give you that. And anybody that claims they can is selling water to a drowning person. Because design is about developing the process. So the act of designing is the development of the process itself. So each need develops its own process. In the end, you get a plan. But as I've already suggested, it's important to understand that you can develop plans that aren't about things. They can be about systems and organization, interaction. Money is designed. Our economy is designed. Everything we do is designed. We've decided to do what we do. What can it not do? This is really, really important. Because as things get sold, ideas get sold to you. Conferences are assembled to tell you that design thinking can solve the needs that you have, or it can be a tool that you can apply to help solve your needs. It's important to understand that it's not a panacea. It's a process that can give you the tool that you can then take out and act, but there's still all the messiness of politics and economy and personal interaction. This is an example of narrow thinking, a singular goal in mind and a problem. And it's an obvious solution. You build a bridge, right? But if you start thinking in design thinking, that bridge to get to the money, it's not just about, well, I don't want to fall in with the sharks and I don't know if I could reach the ledge on the other side. It's about, what does it mean to build the bridge? What does it mean for a bridge to, like, if you consider building a bridge with gender equity in mind, what would that be like? I mean, that's the sort of question that a designer will ask at the outset of a project and will want to explore and research. You might come up with something more like this. You might come up with something that is serving every function you want, you get your bag of money at the end and you stay away from the sharks, but it has a dynamism that is absent from the singular approach. So good design leads to kind of a growth of fecund systems. And are there universal methods? Yes, there are. And those, like I touched on earlier, are simply tools of acquisition of knowledge and ways to communicate. The primary job that any designer does, whether they're working with colleagues or they're interacting with a client or they're talking to somebody about what they do, is communication. Design could very much be housed in communication schools as well as being its own silo. If I have an idea and I can't get it across to you, I can't get my idea built, and that's primarily what we do. So there are many methods to communicate. Always find the one that you're best at if you're wanting to apply a design method, and just keep doing it until somebody is understanding you. And the idea of making and communicating simultaneously and making those the methods of communication, not simple verbal presentations. They're less effective than sitting down with somebody with a napkin and a pen and explaining what it is that I'm trying to get you to understand. It's about having you think about multiple things simultaneously, so multiple concepts. That's why a picture contains 1,000 words, because it's not about a singular idea. It's about multiple ideas simultaneously. The process is technique. and it's moving towards resolving onto the plan. And I've kind of beaten that to death. So I want to come back to this briefly and explain that there are kind of universal terms that we can apply to a design process. Invariably, when you set out to do a design, you have to define what it is that you're attempting to design a solution for. So definition is probably, I'm not going to be definitive about it, it's probably the outset of every design process. The thing with the design process is to understand that it is dependent on knowing the problem that you're seeking to solve and then being willing to explore alternative solutions. So in the research and discovery phase of a design process, that's where you ask those big questions, and that's where the big questions get developed. So that's why I really would push people that are looking at food systems this morning to really pay attention, maybe even more so, because you probably already have an idea of what food systems are internally. Really focus on the other two presentations, because there might be solutions in those spaces for you. And ultimately, a design process is something that must be iterative. It's something that you need to be comfortable with deciding, well, I've gotten to the point where I've got a draft of a plan outlined, but there's something not working here. Something doesn't feel right. Something isn't pieced together. So you need to go back a step. So there's an iterative process to this, and it is vertical. It's multidimensional, as I mentioned before. And you go through this process multiple times and for different details as you go through the process. And then how you will apply it today. What you will be doing today, first you're going to gather information. And then you're going to be using a particular process that has been developed by the Minnesota Design Team, which is a nonprofit organization of volunteer designers that go to communities and engage with those communities in getting their voice into a plan format so that they have a living document that then is a communication tool for the community as they engage with professional designers and engineers and contractors to build out city infrastructure, parks, and other facilities and identities for the town. So it is the most generalized process we could come up with that should be transposable to other issues. It's not the only one, but it follows a fairly typical design process. So there's the information dump, which is what this morning is all about. That's where you get all of the information that you can possibly have in a 3-hour period dealing with 3 very complex systems. And then you will break into groups, and in those groups you will have all of your ideas. So that's where the note-taking and the drawing is going to be really important this morning. Because when you show up with those groups in such a limited amount of time, you need to be able to quickly communicate what it is that you know and the ideas that you have that you see as potential solutions. And because when you're dealing with these scale of things, it's very hard to get on a Post-it note the solution to how do we alter 3,000-mile Caesar salad production and make it about a 10-minute walk Caesar salad. That's something that's hard, but that's what you're going to be focusing on, is getting all those discrete points together so you can communicate those. Then the group will decide on team members, and you'll move into a system where you'll work with 1 or 2 or 3 other people, and you will refine the ideas that you have assigned to yourselves in the larger group, and you will develop a kind of a protocol for communicating those ideas first to the larger group and then back to the entire community of our conference today. And in that process, you will then be creating stuff. So phase 3 is you'll come back in, you'll confirm the solutions, you'll clarify the relationships between the solution nodes, if you will, that you will have developed, and then you will go into production. So in the production mode, you will be transferring to kind of larger format sheets of paper, mind maps, sketches, lists. The kind of order of how you're going to present all those materials will be developed at that time. And then you will compile and figure out who's going to present that back to us. And when we arrive back here at, was it 3:35? Am I correct about that? Yeah? 3:45. You will then be presenting to the larger group. And I probably have a moment for questions if anybody has a question. Did I? Uh-oh. I haven't been accused of that before. I have to say, I'm typically known in my reviews at school for rambling and rambling, so that was about as succinct as I've ever been. And for somebody with so many opinions, I avoided opinions, mostly. No? Okay. Good. That's good. Yeah, I guess just as a kind of a wrap-up on the philosophical issue of what is thinking is I would suggest that what Tom touched on last night about a paradigm shift, it's primarily that we're realizing that we can't think in a singular manner. We can no longer reduce everything down to a single actionable point. And that is the primary fulcrum of the paradigm shift that we all sense and we all feel. Certain physical realities, I mean, we've got peak resource issues, we've got population overshoot of the dominant species of the planet issues, we've got some massive issues going on. And we have to deal with all of the tools and toys that we've made. But all of those problems were about singular thinking. And it's this kind of multilateral thinking and getting together and doing it together and getting opinions on the table and resolving on plans that are developed through a democratic process, which is what design is typically about. So, yeah. Yes, Tom.
Review. One of the other things, it's not really a question, it's more just sort of adding to what you were saying. There's a faculty member at the U named Wilma Kunsthal who's been studying, she's a neuroscientist, and she's been studying how we create, how through our thinking, how we create. And one of the things that she's talked about is that we get experience from the world and we sort it in our brain and then we put it back together when we identify the things that are in our reality, right? But she says creative people intentionally miscombine things. They keep most things constant, but then they'll just think about it, they'll call it something else, or they'll think about it at a different scale, or they'll turn it on its head. And I thought that might be a useful addition to this group thinking about thinking, which is to keep most things constant and then just sort of flip or change one aspect of it and see if that's productive. And if it isn't, then go try something else.
Right.
And it's that intentional miscombining or recombining of experience in a new way, which she thinks is actually how the creative brain works.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's how, I mean, I touched briefly, and Tom did also, on kind of childhood development and how we learn as kids and then how we're taught to learn when we enter the school system. They're completely different. I mean, the one is about discovery and turning things on their head, and the other one is about the correct answer. And that's a gross generalization, I know, but yeah, that's a very, very important point, is play. Play, mess with things. Make it messier than it already is. Excellent. Thank you very much.